Hello and welcome to the video series for SLO 2023. This series of videos plan to give you an introduction to linguistic Olympiads in general and basic concepts in linguistics. Today, I'll be talking about phrases and clauses. In video 2, we looked at morphology and parts of speech. Morphology refers to the smallest meaningful unit in a language. We later looked at words and covered the definitions of a noun, verb, and adjective. In video 3, we looked at the correspondence between morphology and phonology. Phonology refers to the sound system in a language. We have slowly progressed from morphology to bigger units like words. Today, we will cover phrases and clauses. So, what is a phrase? A phrase, to put it very simplistically, is a group of words. Within the group of words, there is one of them which functions as the head of the phrase. What do I mean by that? For example, the phrase, "the dog's ears," is known as a noun phrase. This means that the phrase may be substituted with just a noun. For example, the dog's ears can just be shortened to ears, which is a noun. Here, I would like to introduce the concepts of head and dependent. The head is the important part of the phrase, while the dependent just provides more information. Let us now look at another phrase, "pretty white flower." The words pretty white can be substituted with just one adjective, hence they form an adjective phrase together. As for the phrase pretty white flower, it can be substituted with just one noun, i.e. flower, so it is a noun phrase. Now we'll be moving on to clauses. A clause expresses a proposition and always has a main verb. A proposition refers to naming an event or a state. For example, the sun sets is an event. Each sentence is made up of at least one clause. The verb tells us about the action and what is happening. However, we also need to know about the participants who are involved. This is where the concepts of S, A, and O come in. A side note here, some of you may have heard of the terms subject and object when talking about grammar. As not all languages have the theoretical concepts of subject and object, linguistics has opted to use S, A, and O to label the participants in a clause. These participants are usually represented by noun phrases. The notions of subject and object basically correlate word order with grammatical roles like agent and patient. You can look up the concept of grammatical role at your own time. Back to the topic of S, A, and O. Before we look at the examples, let me first cover the difference between an intransitive and a transitive clause. An intransitive clause has one participant, i.e. the cat. A transitive clause has two participants, i.e. the cat and the rat. S refers to the single argument of an intransitive clause. In the sentence, the cat snored, S refers to the cat. A refers to the agent-like argument of a transitive clause. In the sentence, the cat hit the rat, A refers to the cat, who is doing something just like an agent. O refers to the patient-like argument of a transitive clause. Patient-like means that the participant is receiving the action, just like how a patient receives treatment from a doctor. In the sentence, the cat hit the rat is on the receiving end of the action, hence O refers to the rat. Languages of the world may differ in how they group S, A, and O. For example, a nominative-accusative language like English treats S and A as the same, and O as different. For example, if we replace the nouns with pronouns, we have he snores and he hit him. We see that S and A both take the same form, i.e. he, whereas the O argument, which is the one receiving the action in a transitive clause, takes a different form, i.e. him. This brings us to our next topic, syntactic case. Syntactic case is when the nouns look different in form or have prefixes or suffixes attached to them, so that we know what kind of participant it is in a clause. It tells us who is doing what to whom in relation to the action specified in the verb. Syntactic case is hence usually attached to nouns, pronouns, or parts of speech which can comprise a noun phrase, such as adjectives. It is also attached to adpositions. For example, in the sentence, "I'm going to the market," to is an adposition which denotes the direction a participant is moving towards another participant. Adpositions also help us infer who is doing what to whom, so syntactic case can also be attached to them. In the previous slides, we have mentioned that English sees the S and A argument as the same. Cases in English have mostly been lost from Old English, but we still have them in the pronouns. For example, if the participant is an S or A argument, we use pronouns like he, she, it, they, I, and we, which are marked for the nominative case. The forms of pronouns change when the participant or noun phrase is functioning as an O argument. For example, him, her, it, them, me, us. Actually, here we see that the third person neuter pronoun it has no change in form on the surface. Finally, for the genitive case, which indicates possession, we see that the pronouns change to his, hers, theirs, mine, and ours. These are some other cases which are useful to know. As mentioned, English is a nominative accusative language, as the language marks S and A in the same manner and O differently. We have seen this from the pronouns. Another pattern that is common among world languages is to see S and O in the same manner and A differently. We call this ergative absolutive languages. The ergative case marks the A argument, and the absolutive case marks the S and O arguments. Another case which is useful to know is the dative case. The dative case usually marks indirect objects or nouns which have the role of recipient, a beneficiary of an action, or a possessor of an item. In the sentence, I gave the rose to him. Him is the recipient and is marked in a dative case. The dative case is also indexed by the preposition to in that sentence. So far, we have covered phrases and the concepts of head and dependent, as well as sentences with one clause. Within that one clause, which has a main verb, we can label the participants of that clause using S, A, and O. As mentioned, each sentence is made up of at least one clause. However, sometimes complicated sentences may be made up of more than one clause. What happens if a sentence has more than one clause? Now, we'll be moving on to the types of clauses which exist in such sentences. There are two main types of such clauses: coordinate clauses and subordinate clauses. Under subordinate clauses, there are three subtypes: complement clauses, adverbial clauses, and relative clauses. What is the difference between the two main categories of clauses? A coordinate clause is a clause which is not syntactically dependent on the other clause and is joined using a coordinating conjunction or a connective word. What does it mean by being syntactically independent? When you take the coordinate clauses apart, they can be individual sentences. For example, he runs and he jumps can be broken into two sentences. He runs. He jumps. A subordinate clause is embedded in the matrix clause. For example, in she smiled because the sun was up, she smiled is the main event and hence the matrix or the main clause. Because the sun was up is the subordinate clause. It gives you more information about why she smiled, and it cannot stand alone as a sentence. A complement clause is a subordinate clause which functions like a noun. On the right hand side, we have three characteristics of complement clauses. Firstly, the complement is usually a core argument, i.e. the S, A, or O of the sentence. In the third sentence, I wish to sleep all day is an adverb describing the extent and the duration. It provides extra information that is not obligatory. A complement clause basically provides obligatory information about the participant of the clause. Secondly, a complement clause may be introduced by the words that or which. These words are called complementizers. Finally, one way to test if a clause is a complement clause is by seeing if you can substitute the entire clause with a noun or the demonstrative this. For example, in I think the moon is round, I can simply substitute the moon is round with this. I think this. You may pause the video here to look at the examples. Basically, The first two are named after certain properties they exhibit. For example, the that complement clause is introduced by the word that, and the sentence-like complement clause may exist as a sentence. The next three examples are named after the type of verb that is featured in the complement clause. Now we will move on to the second type of subordinate clauses, adverbial clauses. Adverbial clauses, as evident from the name, function like an adverb. Basically, it gives additional information that is non-obligatory. Secondly, they are grouped by semantic types, i.e. according to meaning. Hence, adverbial clauses are open to interpretation. For example, in the sentence he wanted to go to school to learn is an adverbial clause giving additional information. However, this may be interpreted as an adverbial clause of reason or purpose, depending on how you see it. Here are some examples of adverbial clauses which cover the different types, such as time, reason, manner, purpose, and condition. You may pause the video here to read the examples. Finally, the last type of subordinate clause we will cover today is relative clauses. In terms of the function of relative clauses, a relative clause modifies a head noun or pronoun, meaning that it adds more information so that you can identify what the noun is. For example, in the sentence, he was the boy who sang the school song in my year, who sang the school song in my year is an adverbial clause which helps me to identify who the boy is. A relative clause may or may not have a relativizer. This can be a WH word like who or which. The relativizer introduces the relative clause, as seen in the example previously mentioned. He was the boy who sang the school song in my year. There are two types of relative clauses in English, restrictive and non-restrictive relative clauses. A restrictive relative clause provides essential information for identifying the referent of the noun or pronoun. It helps to limit or restrict the reference of the noun or pronoun to a particular group or a subset of that group. In the example, the only woman who won the Nobel Prize twice was Marie Curie, we see that the restrictive relative clause, who won the Nobel Prize twice, provides essential information that restricts the reference of possible women. On the other hand, a non-restrictive relative clause gives additional information which is non-essential. This is indicated by pauses when we are reading it, and that's when we are writing it, we are indicating it via commas. In the example, that girl who won the art competition last year is actually an amazing singer. The non-restrictive relative clause, who won the art competition last year, actually provides additional information about the girl. The sentence would still be grammatically correct and meaningful if this clause were removed, i.e., that girl is actually an amazing singer. Alright, so that's all for this video on phrases and clauses. I understand that concepts like S, A, and O might be too much to take in one sitting. If you have any questions about the concepts, please comment below and we'll be very happy to answer them. Thank you very much for listening and all the best for the Olympiad.